Settle in. This one starts with a question nobody wanted to ask. There was a house on Mapleton Drive that people walked past without thinking. Not because it was unremarkable, but because it had become part of the landscape in the way forgotten things do. Beige siding, dark green shutters, a front porch with 2 chairs that never moved. The lawn stayed mowed. The hedges stayed trimmed. But no one ever saw anyone doing the work. The neighbors had theories. An older man lived there, they thought, kept to himself. Maybe a veteran, maybe just private. The kind of person who nods once if you pass him at the mailbox and then goes back inside. That was enough for most people. In a neighborhood where everyone knew everyone, this house was the exception. And exceptions, when they are quiet, tend to stay that way. Until they do not. The first crack in the silence came from a postal worker named Angela Ruiz. She had been on the Mapleton route for 6 years. She knew which houses got packages daily, which ones only got junk mail, and which ones had dogs that barked the second she stepped on the porch. The house at 428 Mapleton had always been consistent. Mail went in. Mail disappeared. No issues. But in late October, Angela noticed the mail was not disappearing anymore. At first, it was just a day or 2, then a week. Then the box started to overflow. She tried wedging letters into the slot. She left a note. She knocked on the door twice. No answer. The porch light stayed off even at night. On the 3rd week, she filed a report with her supervisor. The supervisor called the local police non-emergency line. A wellness check was scheduled. That is when I got involved. My name does not matter here. What matters is that I have spent the last 8 years covering cases like this one. Cold files, forgotten people, stories that slipped through because no one was paying attention at the right moment. I was working on a separate piece when a contact at the county sheriff's office mentioned the Mapleton call. He said it in passing, like it was probably nothing. An old man who forgot to collect his mail. Maybe a fall. Maybe a hospital stay no one reported. But something in the way he said it made me pause. I asked if I could tag along when the deputies went to the house. He said yes, as long as I stayed outside the line. We arrived on a Thursday morning. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. Everything smelled like wet asphalt and rot. The deputies knocked. No response. They knocked again, louder. One of them called out, identified himself. Still nothing. They tried the door. Locked. They circled the house, checking windows. All the blinds were drawn. No movement inside. No sound. One of the deputies, a man named Alvarez, came back to the front porch and made the call. They were going in. The door came open with one solid kick. The lock was old. The frame splintered. The smell hit us immediately. Not decay, not yet, but something stale and wrong. Air that had been sealed too long. The deputies stepped inside, hands on their belts, calling out again. I stayed on the porch, recorder running. What they found in the first 60 seconds changed the entire shape of the case. The living room was neat. Almost too neat. Furniture arranged in perfect right angles. No dust, no clutter. A single coffee mug on the side table, clean and dry. The television remote lined up parallel to the edge of the table. The carpet had vacuum lines, but there was no one inside. Not in the living room, not in the kitchen, not upstairs in the 2 bedrooms or the single bathroom. The house was empty. And yet, in the kitchen, on the counter next to the sink, there was a notebook, spiral bound, plain black cover. It was open to a page covered in handwriting. Neat, small, controlled letters. The same sentence repeated over and over, filling the entire page. I am fine. I am safe. I do not need help. The deputies photographed it. They bagged it. They searched the rest of the house more carefully. They found more notebooks, 7 in total, all black, all spiral bound, all filled with the same repeated phrases in the same handwriting. I am fine. I am safe. I do not need help. I want to be left alone. I am not missing. Do not look for me. Each notebook had dates written in the top corner of each page. The entries went back 4 months. There was no sign of struggle, no blood, no forced entry from the inside. The back door was locked. The windows were locked. The basement was finished and empty, nothing but storage boxes stacked neatly along one wall. But upstairs, in the smaller bedroom, they found something that made Alvarez stop moving. A chair, wooden, straight-backed, positioned in the center of the room facing the window. The blinds were open just enough to see the street below. On the floor, next to the chair, there was a pair of binoculars, and beneath the chair, a stack of photographs. Printed photos, not phone screenshots, actual 4x6 prints, the kind you get from a drugstore machine. The photos were all of the same person. A woman, mid-30s, dark hair pulled back. She appeared in different locations, getting out of a car, walking into a grocery store, standing on a porch 2 houses down. In every photo, she was alone. In every photo, she looked like she had no idea she was being watched. Alvarez called it in. The scene was no longer a wellness check. It was something else. The house at 428 Mapleton Drive was now a crime scene. But the crime itself was not clear. No victim had been reported. No one was inside. And the man who supposedly lived there, the quiet neighbor nobody visited, had no name attached to the property records. The deed was held by an LLC. The utilities were paid by automatic bank draft from an account that traced back to a P.O. box in another county. There were no tax records, no voter registration, no driver's license on file. The man everyone assumed lived there did not exist. That is when I knew this case was going to be different. I spent the rest of that day talking to the neighbors. Most of them gave the same answers. They had seen him, maybe. A man in his 50s or 60s, average height, always wore a baseball cap, drove a dark sedan, older model, kept odd hours. No one knew his name. No one had ever had a conversation with him longer than a few words. But one neighbor, a woman named Diane Poole, who lived 3 doors down, told me something that did not fit. She said she had seen the man 2 weeks earlier. He was standing in his driveway at night, just standing there in the rain, staring at her house. She said it made her uncomfortable, so she closed her blinds. But the next morning, she found a note tucked under her windshield wiper. The note said, "You should lock your back door." She thought it was a prank. She threw it away. I asked if she remembered what the handwriting looked like. She said it was small, neat, controlled. That matched the notebooks. I asked if she still had the note. She said no, but she remembered something else. The man in the driveway was not alone. There was someone else in the car. A second person, sitting in the passenger seat, not moving. She could not see a face, just a shape, a silhouette. I asked if the shape looked like a man or a woman. She hesitated. Then she said she was not sure, but she thought the person in the car might have been looking at her too. I filed that detail and kept moving. By the time the sun set, the forensics team had been through the house twice. They found no fingerprints, not on the doorknobs, not on the notebooks, not on the kitchen counter. Everything had been wiped. But they did find something in the basement. Hidden behind the stack of storage boxes, there was a false wall. Drywall installed over what should have been open space. Someone had sealed off a section of the basement. They cut through it. Inside, they found a small room, 6 feet by 8 feet. No windows, a single bulb overhead, a cot, a bucket, and on the wall, scratched into the drywall with something sharp, a single sentence. He says, "I am safe." The handwriting was different, shakier, desperate. That was when the case stopped being about a missing man and started being about the person he might have kept. The woman in the photographs was named Claire Mathis. It took the deputies less than an hour to identify her. She lived 4 houses down from 428 Mapleton. She was a nurse. Worked night shifts at the county hospital, single. No record. No red flags. When they knocked on her door that night, she answered immediately. She was calm, polite, confused. She said she had never been inside 428 Mapleton. She had never spoken to the man who lived there. She did not know why anyone would have photographs of her. But when they asked if she had ever felt like she was being watched, she stopped answering. One of the deputies pressed her. He asked if anything unusual had happened in the last few months. Anything at all. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said yes. 3 months earlier, she came home from a shift and found her back door unlocked. She was sure she had locked it. She checked the house. Nothing was missing. Nothing disturbed. She assumed she had made a mistake. 2 weeks after that, she found a piece of mail on her kitchen table that she did not remember bringing inside. It was junk mail, an ad for a security system. She thought maybe she had carried it in and forgotten. A month ago, she woke up in the middle of the night and smelled cigarette smoke. She did not smoke. None of her neighbors smoked. She opened her windows and went back to sleep. Last week, she found a pair of shoes in her closet that were not hers. Women's shoes, her size. She thought maybe she had bought them and forgotten, but they were worn. Someone had walked in them. She started sleeping with her bedroom door locked. The deputies asked if she had reported any of this. She said no. She said she felt stupid, like she was imagining things. But now, hearing it all together, she realized she was not imagining anything. Someone had been inside her house multiple times, and she had been alone with that knowledge for months. The deputies placed a patrol unit outside her house that night. They told her not to leave. They told her they would figure out who the man was and where he went. But I already knew this was not going to be simple, because the man at 428 Mapleton had not left in a hurry. He had not packed bags. He had not left a mess. He had wiped the house clean, locked every door, and walked away. And whoever had been in that basement room had written a message that suggested they believed they were safe, which meant either they were wrong or they had been moved somewhere else. The notebooks became the key. The forensics team analyzed the handwriting. It matched across all 7 notebooks. The same person had written every entry, but the pressure of the pen changed in the later entries. The lines were heavier, more forceful, like someone had been told to write the same thing over and over, and the repetition was breaking them. The dates told a story. The first notebook started 4 months ago. The entries were spaced out, one every few days. But by the 3rd notebook, the entries were daily. By the 5th, they were multiple times a day. The last notebook had entries that ran together, page after page, no breaks, just the same sentence grinding into the paper until the pen tore through. That was not the behavior of someone who was fine. That was the behavior of someone who had been told to prove they were fine, again and again, until the proof became meaningless. I asked the deputies if they had identified the handwriting. They said no. It did not match Claire Mathis. It did not match anyone in the system. But I had a theory. If the person in the basement had been kept there, and if they had been told to write those entries, then the notebooks were not a journal. They were evidence of compliance, proof that someone could be controlled, which meant the man at 428 Mapleton was not just watching Claire Mathis. He was practicing. The question was, practicing for what? I stayed on the case. I filed requests for security footage from nearby businesses. I tracked down more neighbors. I pulled property records for every house on Mapleton Drive. I looked for patterns, connections, anything that would explain why this house, why this street, why now. And then I found the detail that changed everything. The LLC that owned 428 Mapleton had purchased 3 other properties in the last 2 years, all residential, all in quiet neighborhoods, all within a 30-mile radius. The deputies checked the other addresses. 2 of the houses were occupied, normal families, no issues. But the 3rd house was empty, and when they went inside, they found the same setup. Neat furniture, wiped surfaces, and in the basement, another false wall. Behind it, another small room, same size, same cot, same bucket. But this time, the message on the wall was different. I told him I would stay quiet. The case was escalating, fast, and somewhere, the man who had built these rooms was still out there, watching, waiting, planning the next step. This is where the case begins. This is where the fear takes root, because the person who did this was not impulsive. They were methodical, they were patient, and they knew exactly how to stay hidden in plain sight. The notebooks, the rooms, the photographs, the silence, all of it was part of a system. And systems like this do not stop on their own. They have to be dismantled, piece by piece, until the truth is unavoidable. So listen carefully, because the next part of this story is where the cracks start to show, where the interviews begin to contradict, where the timeline tightens, and where the people who should have answers start to look the other way. The house on Mapleton Drive was never just one man's secret. It was a warning no one saw coming. The morning after the second house was discovered, I sat in a diner 3 blocks from the sheriff's station and spread everything I had across the table. Receipts, property records, a hand-drawn map of the addresses, photographs of the notebooks. The forensics team had released preliminary reports, and I had copies. The waitress refilled my coffee without asking. She glanced at the papers, then looked away quickly. People do that when they see crime scene photos. They want to know, but they do not want to be involved. I was looking for a pattern, not just in the houses, but in the gaps between them. Why these streets? Why these neighborhoods? The locations were not random. They formed a loose arc across the county, all within a 20-minute drive of each other. All in areas where people kept to themselves, where a quiet house would not draw attention. But there was something else, something I had not articulated yet. Each property had been purchased within 3 weeks of a specific event: a foreclosure, a death in the family, a sudden relocation. The LLC moved in during moments of transition, when paperwork was messy and no one was paying close attention. That took research. That took planning. Whoever was behind this had been watching the real estate market like a predator watches a trail. I made a list of everyone connected to the sales: realtors, attorneys, title companies. Most of the names were different, but one name appeared twice: a property manager named Gerald Finch, who had overseen the final walkthroughs on 2 of the houses. I called his office. A receptionist said he was out of town. I asked when he would be back. She said she was not sure. I asked if I could leave a message. She said she would pass it along. I did not believe her. I drove to his office anyway. It was in a strip mall near the highway. The front door was locked. The lights were off. A sign in the window said, "Closed for personal leave." I looked through the glass. The office was clean. Too clean. No papers on the desk. No coffee cups. No clutter. Just empty surfaces and a computer monitor turned off. I took a photo of the sign. Then I called the sheriff's office and told them to add Gerald Finch to the list. While I waited for a callback, I went back to the neighbors on Mapleton Drive. This time, I was not asking about the man in the baseball cap. I was asking about Claire Mathis. Most people said she was quiet, kept to herself, worked long hours, no boyfriend, no visitors. A few people mentioned she had a dog, a small terrier, but it had died about 6 months ago. She buried it in her backyard. Someone saw her digging the grave alone. One neighbor, an older man named Patrick Ellison, told me something different. He said Claire used to be more social. A few years ago, she would wave. She would stop and chat if you caught her outside. But something changed. He could not pinpoint when. It was gradual. She stopped making eye contact. She stopped answering her door. She started parking in her garage instead of the driveway, so you could not see when she came and went. I asked if he thought she was scared of something. He said he did not know, but he remembered one time, maybe 8 months ago, she asked him if he had seen anyone in her yard. He said no. She thanked him and went back inside. He never saw her outside again after that. I asked if he had told the deputies this. He said no. No one had asked. That bothered me, not because he was lying, but because it meant the investigators were not asking the right questions yet. They were still treating this as a missing person case with a side of stalking. They had not made the jump to what it really was. This was a long-term operation, and Claire Mathis was not the first target. She was just the one who got noticed. I went back to the station. The deputies had run a deeper search on the LLC. The company was registered in Delaware, which made it almost impossible to trace ownership without a court order. But the bank account tied to the automatic payments had activity going back 3 years. Steady transactions. Utility bills. Property taxes. Maintenance fees. All paid on time. No irregularities. Except one. 2 months ago, there was a wire transfer out of the account. $12,000. It went to a private investigator in another state. The PI's name was Roland Voss. He specialized in background checks and surveillance. The deputies contacted Voss. He said he had been hired to conduct a deep background on a woman. He was given a name, a workplace, and a home address. He provided a full report. Photos, schedule, known associates, medical history, financial records. He said the client paid in cash and communicated only through encrypted email. He never met them in person. The woman he investigated was Claire Mathis. The report had been delivered 6 weeks before the first notebook entry was dated. That was the moment the case stopped being reactive and started being a hunt. Because whoever had built the rooms and written the notebooks had not stumbled into this. They had researched. They had hired professionals. They had constructed a profile. And they had done it all while staying completely invisible. I asked the deputies if they had checked Claire's medical records. They said they were working on a warrant. I told them to move faster. While they waited for the paperwork, I started digging into Roland Voss. His website was generic. Professional headshot. Bland copy about discretion and results. But his client list was not public, and his reviews were sparse. Most of his work came through referrals. I found an old forum post where someone had mentioned hiring Voss for a child custody case. The post included a detail that stuck with me. Voss had a policy. He did not ask why clients needed the information. He just delivered it. No judgment. No questions. That made him useful to people who did not want to explain themselves. I called him directly. He did not answer. I left a voicemail. I said I was working on a story about privacy laws and wanted to ask about his process. I did not mention Claire Mathis. I did not mention the case. He called me back an hour later. His voice was flat, professional. He said he could give me 20 minutes. I asked if we could meet in person. He said no, phone only. I asked him how he vetted his clients. He said he did not. I asked if he ever had concerns about how his reports were used. He said that was not his job. I asked if he remembered the Claire Mathis case. He paused. Then he said He could not discuss specific clients. I told him Claire Mathis was being stalked. I told him the person who hired him had built hidden rooms in basements and kept someone locked inside. I told him his report had been part of the setup. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I provided information. What people do with it is not my responsibility." I asked if he still had the emails from the client. He said no. He deleted everything after the job was complete. That was policy. I asked if he remembered anything about the client. Anything at all. He said the client used a burner email. The payment drop was at a PO box in a city he had never heard of. The instructions were clear and specific. No deviation. No follow-up questions. I asked if that seemed unusual. He said no. Half his clients operated that way. I thanked him and hung up. That conversation told me two things. One, the person behind this knew how to stay anonymous. Two, they had done this before. I went back to the property records. I expanded the search to surrounding counties. I looked for similar patterns. LLCs purchasing homes in quiet areas. Quick closings. Minimal oversight. I found 4 more properties. The deputies checked them. 3 were occupied. Normal residents. No connection to the case. But the 4th house was different. It was abandoned. The utilities had been shut off 6 months ago. The grass was overgrown. The mailbox was rusted shut. But when the deputies forced the door open, they found the same setup. Clean interior. Wiped surfaces. Furniture arranged with precision. And in the basement, another false wall. Another hidden room. But this time, the room was not empty. There was a body. Female. Late 20s. Decomposition was advanced. The medical examiner estimated she had been dead for at least 4 months. Cause of death was asphyxiation. Manner of death was homicide. She had been restrained. Zip ties around her wrists and ankles. A gag in her mouth. She had been left in that room and forgotten. On the wall, scratched into the drywall, was another message. He said I was safe if I stayed quiet. The handwriting matched the message from the second house. The body was identified 3 days later. Her name was Amy Calloway. She had been reported missing 7 months earlier. She lived alone. She worked as a paralegal. She had no family in the area. Her disappearance had been classified as voluntary. No evidence of foul play. No leads. She had been forgotten. And now she was evidence. The case shifted. The media picked it up. The sheriff held a press conference. The FBI was called in. Suddenly, the quiet investigation became a multi-agency task force. But I stayed focused on the details that were not making the news. Amy Calloway had lived 16 miles from Claire Mathis. She had been reported missing 2 months before the first notebook entry in the Mapleton house. Her last known location was a gas station near the highway. Security footage showed her filling her tank. She looked calm, unbothered. She paid in cash and drove away. No one saw her after that. But her car was found a week later in a grocery store parking lot. The keys were in the ignition. The doors were unlocked. Her purse was on the passenger seat. Her phone was inside the purse, powered off. There were no signs of struggle, no witnesses, no leads. The case went cold. Until now. I obtained a copy of the missing person report. The investigating officer was a deputy named Harlan Moss. I called him. He said he remembered the case. He said it had felt off from the start. The scene was too clean, too staged. But without evidence, there was nothing to pursue. I asked if he had interviewed anyone. He said yes. Co-workers, a few acquaintances, her landlord. No one had anything useful. She was described as quiet, reliable, no enemies, no drama. I asked if anyone mentioned her feeling watched or unsafe. He said no, but he admitted he had not asked that question directly. I asked if he still had his notes. He said yes. He offered to send them over. When the file arrived, I read it 3 times. Most of it was routine. Witness statements, timeline reconstruction, dead ends. But there was one detail buried in the middle. A co-worker had mentioned that Amy had started locking her office door during lunch breaks. When asked why, Amy said she felt like someone had been going through her desk. Nothing was missing, just moved, rearranged. The co-worker had laughed it off, said maybe the cleaning crew was being careless. But Amy had stopped eating lunch in the break room after that. She started going to her car. That was 3 weeks before she disappeared. I cross-referenced the timeline with the property purchases. The house where Amy's body was found had been bought 5 weeks before she went missing. The room had been built for her. That realization changed everything. This was not opportunistic. This was not someone who saw a chance and took it. This was someone who selected targets, researched them, built infrastructure, and then moved in. The notebooks were not confessions. They were conditioning. The repeated phrases were designed to break resistance, to make the victim believe their silence was cooperation. And the photographs of Claire Mathis were not obsession. They were preparation. She was next. The deputies increased the patrol outside Claire's house. They installed cameras. They told her not to go anywhere alone. She took leave from the hospital. She stayed inside. But I knew that was not enough. Because the person who had done this was patient. They had waited months between Amy and Claire. They had moved between houses without leaving a trace. They had wiped everything clean and walked away. They were not going to make a mistake just because the police were watching. They were going to wait. And while they waited, I kept digging. I went back to Gerald Finch, the property manager. His office was still closed. His phone went to voicemail. I checked his social media. Nothing. No posts. No activity. I ran a background check. He was 53, divorced, no kids, no criminal record. He had worked in property management for 15 years, clean history, decent reviews. But 6 months ago, he had taken out a second mortgage on his house, $40,000. The loan had been paid off in full 2 months later. That was unusual. People do not pay off loans that fast unless they come into money. I checked his bank records. I could not access them legally, but I had a contact who could pull limited information. The contact said Finch had made 3 large cash deposits in the span of 2 months. $15,000. 10,000, 15,000 again. Cash deposits that size trigger IRS scrutiny, but Finch had structured them just under the reporting threshold. That was not luck. That was knowledge. I called the FBI agent assigned to the case. Her name was Leona Tran. She had been with the Bureau for 12 years. She specialized in organized crime and financial tracking. I told her about Finch. She said they were already looking at him. I asked if they had located him. She said no. I asked if they thought he was involved. She said they did not have enough yet, but his disappearance was suspicious. I asked what she needed. She said a connection, something that tied Finch directly to the houses or the victims. I told her I would find it. I went back to the title company that had processed the property sales. I spoke to the clerk who had handled the transactions. She remembered Finch. She said he was professional, efficient. He never caused problems. I asked if she remembered anything unusual about the sales. She said no. Everything was standard. I asked if Finch had ever brought anyone with him to the closings. She paused. Then she said yes. Once, a man had accompanied him to one of the signings. She did not get a name. The man did not speak. He just stood in the corner and watched. I asked what the man looked like. She said average height, maybe 50s or 60s. He wore a baseball cap. She did not see his face clearly. I showed her a photo of the Mapleton house. I asked if the man could have been the person neighbors described. She said maybe. She was not sure. I asked if she would be willing to work with a sketch artist. She said yes. The sketch was completed 2 days later. It was generic. A white male. Older. Thin face. No distinguishing features. The kind of face that blends into a crowd. But it was something. The FBI circulated the sketch. Tips started coming in. Most were dead ends. People who thought they recognized a neighbor. A co-worker. A stranger at a gas station. But one tip stood out. A woman in a town 30 miles away said the man in the sketch looked like someone who had rented a storage unit at her facility. She said he paid in cash. He came by once a month. Always alone. Always at night. She gave the FBI the unit number. They obtained a warrant. Inside the unit, they found boxes, dozens of them, neatly stacked, labeled with dates. Each box contained notebooks, hundreds of them, all black, all spiral bound, all filled with the same repeated phrases. I am fine. I am safe. I do not need help. But the handwriting was different in each notebook. Different pressure, different slant, different tremors. These were not all written by the same person. The FBI counted the notebooks. There were over 200, which meant there were more victims. And somewhere, the man who had collected these notebooks was still out there, still watching, still waiting, still adding to his collection. The storage unit discovery turned the case into something none of us were prepared for. 200 notebooks meant 200 sessions of forced writing. It did not mean 200 victims, not necessarily, but it meant the scope was far larger than anyone had estimated. the FBI brought in a handwriting analyst. Her name was Dr. Marion Kepler. She had worked on serial cases before: ransom notes, forged documents, suicide notes that were not suicides. She spent 3 days in a conference room with the notebooks spread across folding tables, comparing loops and pressure points and slant angles. When she finished, she called a meeting. I was allowed in because Agent Tran had decided I was useful. I had found Finch. I had connected the properties. I had pushed when the case was still being treated as a missing person file. She said I could stay as long as I stayed quiet. Dr. Kepler stood at the front of the room with her reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She looked tired. She had brought a projector. She clicked through images of notebook pages, each one covered in the same repeated sentences. She said the handwriting samples represented at least 19 distinct individuals. 19. The room went silent. She continued. She said the notebooks showed clear patterns of psychological coercion. The repetition was a control mechanism. The phrases were designed to internalize compliance. The victims were not just writing the words, they were being conditioned to believe them. She said the handwriting deteriorated over time in almost every case. The letters became shakier. The spacing became irregular. The pressure increased until the pen tore through the paper. That suggested prolonged captivity. Weeks, possibly months. She said 3 of the handwriting samples matched known individuals. Amy Calloway was one. The other 2 were women who had been reported missing in the last 4 years. Both cases had gone cold. Both women were still unaccounted for. Agent Tran asked if the other 16 samples could be identified. Dr. Kepler said possibly, if they could be matched to missing person reports. But it would take time. Handwriting analysis required comparison samples. School records, employment documents, signed leases, anything with a verified signature. She said the process could take months. We did not have months. The media coverage intensified. The case was being called the Notebook Killer. Cable news ran segments. Podcasts picked it up. Amateur sleuths flooded tip lines with theories. Some of them were useful. Most were noise. Claire Mathis stopped leaving her house entirely. The FBI assigned an agent to stay with her. She was cooperative, but she was also terrified. She understood now that the photographs were not the beginning. They were the end of a process. She had been selected, researched, monitored. And if the deputies had not found the house when they did, she would have been taken. I interviewed her once, briefly, with Agent Tran present. I asked her if she had noticed anything in the months before the discovery. Anything that felt wrong, but not wrong enough to report. She thought for a long time. Then she said yes. She said there was a man who came into the hospital sometimes. He was not a patient. He was not a visitor. He was just there. She would see him in the cafeteria, in the parking garage. Once, she saw him standing near the nurse's station, looking at a bulletin board. She said she noticed him because he always wore the same baseball cap, and because he never seemed to be in a hurry. He would just stand, watching. She said she had assumed he was waiting for someone. But now, thinking back, she realized she had never seen him leave with anyone. He was always alone. I asked if she could describe him. She said he was older, white, thin, average height, forgettable. I asked if she had ever spoken to him. She said no, but once he had held a door open for her. She thanked him. He nodded. He did not smile. She said his hands were very clean. She remembered that because she worked in a hospital, and she noticed hands. His were pale, no calluses, no scars. The nails were trimmed short. I asked if she would recognize him again. She said maybe, but she was not sure. Agent Tran asked if the hospital had security footage. Claire said yes, but it was only kept for 30 days before being overwritten. The most recent footage was already gone. I asked Claire if she remembered when she had last seen the man. She said it was about 2 months ago, maybe longer. She had not thought about it until now. That timeline matched. 2 months ago was when the notebooks in the Mapleton house had started to increase in frequency. The man had been preparing. I asked if anyone else at the hospital might have noticed him. She said maybe, but people came and went all the time. Unless someone caused a problem, no one paid attention. I spent the next 2 days at the hospital. I spoke to nurses, security guards, cafeteria workers. I showed them the sketch. Most people said they did not recognize him. A few said maybe. One security guard said he thought he had seen someone like that, but he could not be sure. I asked if the hospital kept a visitor log. They said no. Only patients and employees were tracked. I asked if there were any other cameras in the area, parking lots, nearby businesses, anything that might have captured someone coming and going. The hospital security director pulled footage from the parking garage. We went through hours of recordings. Cars entering, cars leaving, people walking. Most of it was useless. But then we found something. 3 months ago, a dark sedan had parked in the same spot in the garage 4 times over the course of 2 weeks. Each time, it stayed for about an hour. Each time, it left before the next shift change. The car was older, a Honda or a Toyota. The license plate was obscured by a layer of dirt. Deliberate. The driver never got out on camera. But once, the interior light came on when the door opened. Just for a second, we froze the frame. A man in a baseball cap, face turned away from the camera, but visible enough to match the general description. Agent Tran ran the footage through enhancement software. The license plate was still unreadable, but the car model was identified. A 2006 Toyota Camry, dark blue or dark green, common enough to be nearly impossible to track without a plate number. But it was progress. I kept pushing on Gerald Finch. His disappearance was too convenient. The cash deposits were too suspicious. The fact that he had been present at closings for 2 of the properties was too coincidental. Agent Tran agreed. The FBI issued a warrant for his arrest. They put out a bolo. His photo was circulated to law enforcement across 3 states. But Finch was good at disappearing. His credit cards had not been used in 2 weeks. His phone was off. His car had not pinged any toll systems or traffic cameras. He was either hiding or he was already dead. I started looking into his background more carefully. I pulled court records, financial statements, social media history. I found his ex-wife. She lived 2 states away. She had remarried. She had not spoken to Finch in 8 years. I called her. She was reluctant to talk. I explained the case. I told her Finch was wanted in connection with multiple homicides. She went quiet. Then she said, "That does not surprise me." I asked why. She said Finch had always been controlling. Not violent, not abusive in the traditional sense, but controlling. He needed to know where she was, who she was with, what she was doing. He would check her phone. He would follow her to work. He would show up places without telling her, just to make sure she was where she said she would be. She said it got worse over time. He started accusing her of lying even when she was not. He would test her, ask her questions he already knew the answers to, just to see if she would slip up. She said she left because she realized he did not trust anyone. Not her, not friends, not family. He believed everyone was hiding something, and he needed to be the one who found out what it was. I asked if he had ever hurt her. She said no, but she said he scared her. Not because of what he did, but because of how calm he was. She said he never raised his voice. He never lost control. He just tightened his grip slowly, so you did not notice until it was too late. I asked if she thought he was capable of kidnapping, of murder. She paused. Then she said yes. She said if he thought someone deserved it, he would do it without hesitation, and he would justify it to himself completely. I asked if she knew where he might go. She said no. She said he did not have friends. He did not have hobbies. He just worked and watched people. I asked if he had ever mentioned the man in the baseball cap, or anyone he worked with regularly. She said no. Finch did not talk about work. He did not talk about anything personal. He just existed. I thanked her and hung up. That conversation gave me a profile. Finch was not the man in the baseball cap. He was too involved, too visible. The man in the cap was a ghost. But Finch was the facilitator, the logistics guy, the person who made sure the infrastructure was in place, which meant there were at least 2 people involved. And if Finch was gone, either he had run or the man in the cap had decided he was a liability. I went back to the property records. I looked at the timing again. Finch had been involved in 2 closings, but the other properties had used different managers, different title companies, different realtors. That suggested the man in the cap was working with multiple facilitators, or he was moving between networks to avoid detection. I pulled records for every property sale in the county over the last 5 years that matched the pattern. Quiet neighborhoods, quick closings, LLC buyers. I found 12 more properties. The FBI checked them. 8 were occupied, normal residents, no issues. 3 were empty, but clean. No hidden rooms, no evidence. But the 12th property was different. It was a small house on the edge of town. The utilities were still active. The grass was mowed. But no one answered the door. The FBI obtained a warrant. They went in with a tactical team. The house was furnished, clean, staged, like someone was living there, but no one was inside. In the kitchen, on the counter, there was a notebook, black, spiral bound, open to a page filled with handwriting. "I am fine. I am safe. I do not need help. But this time, the notebook was still warm, like someone had been holding it recently. The FBI searched the house. They found fresh food in the refrigerator, a coffee cup in the sink, still damp, a bed that had been slept in within the last 24 hours. In the basement, there was a hidden room, but the false wall had been dismantled. The drywall was pulled away and stacked neatly in the corner. The room was empty. No cot, no bucket, just bare concrete and a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. On the wall, written in marker, was a message. You are too slow. The FBI dusted for prints. They found nothing. They swabbed for DNA. They found nothing. Whoever had been in that house had wiped everything clean before leaving. But they had left the message on purpose. They wanted us to know they were watching. They wanted us to know they were ahead. Agent Tran called a meeting. She said the case had shifted. This was no longer just an investigation. This was a game. And the person playing it was confident enough to taunt law enforcement. She said the profile had changed. The man in the cap was not just organized. He was adaptive. He had been running this operation for years, possibly longer than the notebook suggested. And he had contingencies in place. She said Finch was likely dead. His usefulness had ended the moment his name surfaced in the investigation. She said the focus now was on preventing the next abduction, because the man in the cap was not going to stop. He was going to adjust, and he was going to move faster. The FBI increased patrols in areas that matched the target profile. They issued warnings to women who lived alone. They coordinated with local police to flag suspicious activity. But I knew it was not enough, because the man in the cap had been watching us the entire time. He knew which houses we had checked. He knew which properties were under surveillance. He had dismantled the room and walked away before we even arrived. He was not reacting to the investigation. He was staying ahead of it. I went back to the storage unit. I wanted to see the notebooks again. I wanted to see if there was something we had missed. The unit was still sealed. FBI evidence tape across the door. A uniformed officer standing guard. Agent Tran let me in. She said I had 15 minutes. I walked through the rows of boxes, each one labeled with a date range, each one filled with notebooks. The sheer volume was overwhelming. This was not the work of a few years. This was a decade, maybe more. I opened one of the boxes at random. I pulled out a notebook. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. The same phrases repeated over and over, but the spacing was erratic. The pressure was inconsistent. I flipped through the pages. Near the end, the handwriting changed. It became steadier, more controlled, like the person had given up fighting. I opened another notebook. Same pattern. Resistance at the beginning, compliance at the end. I opened a third. This one was different. The handwriting stayed shaky throughout. It never smoothed out. And on the last page, there was a sentence that broke the pattern. Please, I have a daughter. I stared at that line for a long time. I checked the date on the notebook. 4 years ago. I took a photo of the page. I showed it to Agent Tran. I asked if they had matched this handwriting to a missing person case. She checked the database. She said no. Not yet. I asked if they had cross-referenced missing women with dependent children. She said they had not thought to filter that way. I told her to start. Within 2 hours, they had a match. A woman named Rebecca Soames, reported missing 4 years ago. She had a daughter. The daughter was 7 at the time. She had been placed with Rebecca's sister after the disappearance. Rebecca had worked as a receptionist. She lived alone with her daughter in a small apartment. She had no criminal record, no known enemies, no signs of trouble. She had vanished on a Tuesday afternoon. She dropped her daughter off at school. She went to work. She never came home. Her car was found 3 days later in a shopping mall parking lot. The keys were inside. Her purse was inside. Her phone was dead. There were no witnesses, no leads. The case went cold. The FBI contacted Rebecca's sister. They asked if they could speak to the daughter, who was now 11. The sister agreed, but she asked that a child psychologist be present. The interview was conducted carefully. The daughter, whose name was Emma, did not remember much about the day her mother disappeared. She had been at school. She said her mum had seemed normal that morning, not upset, not scared. But she remembered something else. She said that in the weeks before her mum disappeared, there had been a man who would stand across the street from their apartment. He never did anything. He just stood there. Her mum had noticed him too. She had called the police once, but when the officer arrived, the man was gone. Emma said her mum had started parking in a different spot after that, and she had started walking Emma to the bus stop instead of letting her go alone. Emma said her mum never told her why, but she seemed nervous. The FBI asked if Emma remembered what the man looked like. She said he wore a hat, and he was always very still. That was all she remembered. But it was enough. The pattern was clear now. The man in the cab selected women who were isolated, women who lived alone or had minimal support networks, women who would not be immediately missed, women who could be studied, monitored, and taken without raising alarms. And once he took them, he broke them down slowly, through repetition, through isolation, through fear. The notebooks were not journals. They were proof of dominance, evidence that he could make someone repeat his words until they became their own. Rebecca Soames had resisted. Her handwriting never smoothed out, and somewhere she had been discarded. The FBI expanded the search. They started looking for remains in areas near the properties, parks, wooded lots, abandoned buildings. 3 days later, they found a body, female, decomposed, buried in a shallow grave in a forest preserve 12 miles from the storage unit. Dental records confirmed it was Rebecca Soames. Cause of death was ligature strangulation. Manner of death was homicide. She had been dead for approximately 4 years. Emma was notified. Her aunt asked that she not be told the details, only that her mother had been found, and that the people responsible were being hunted. I attended the press conference. Agent Tran stood at the podium and confirmed that the case was now a serial homicide investigation. She said the FBI believed there were multiple victims. She said they were working to identify the others. She did not mention the man in the cab by name, but she released the sketch. She asked the public for help. Within hours, the tip line was flooded. Most of the tips were useless. People who thought they recognized the sketch from a dream. People who accused their neighbors. People who wanted attention. But one tip came from a truck driver named Luis Ortega. He said he had seen a man matching the sketch at a rest stop 6 months ago. The man had been sitting in a dark blue Camry. He was eating a sandwich. He did not get out of the car. Luis said he remembered because the man had been parked in the same spot for over 2 hours. And when Luis came back from his break, the man was still there, still sitting, still watching. Luis said the man had been watching the women who came in and out of the rest stop. Every time a woman walked past, the man would turn his head slightly. Tracking. Luis said it made him uncomfortable. So he wrote down the license plate. He still had the number. The FBI ran the plate. It came back to a stolen vehicle. Reported stolen 3 weeks before Luis saw it. Recovered 2 weeks after. Found abandoned in a grocery store parking lot. Wiped clean. But the timing matched, and the car matched. The FBI pulled security footage from the rest stop. The cameras were low quality, but they captured the car. And they captured the man. And they captured the man. He was wearing a baseball cap. He never looked directly at the camera, but he was visible enough to confirm the general description. The FBI ran the footage through facial recognition software. No matches. The angle was wrong. The resolution was too low. But they had the car. And they had the timeline. They started tracking similar vehicles in the area. They pulled toll records, traffic cameras, parking garage footage. They found 3 more sightings, all within a 50-mile radius, all within the last year. The car was moving, and it was hunting. The rest stop sighting gave us a new vector. The man in the cap was not just operating in residential areas. He was scouting locations where women were alone and vulnerable. Gas stations, shopping centers, 24-hour diners, places where someone could sit for hours without drawing attention. Agent Tran assembled a team to map the sightings. They used geographic profiling software, the kind developed for tracking serial predators. They plotted the properties. The rest stop. The hospital. The storage unit. Every confirmed location formed a node on the map. The software generated a probability zone, a rough circle covering about 80 square miles. Within that zone, the algorithm predicted the offender likely lived or worked. It was not exact, but it narrowed the search. The FBI started pulling records for every adult male living alone within the zone. They cross-referenced employment records, vehicle registrations, property ownership, thousands of names. It would take weeks to process manually, so they used filters. No criminal record, age 50 to 70. Registered owner of a vehicle matching the Camry description. Employed in a job that allowed flexible hours. The list dropped to 200 names. Still too many. I asked Agent Tran if I could see the list. She hesitated. Then she said I could look, but I could not publish anything without clearance. I agreed. I spent the next 12 hours going through the names. Most were dead ends, retired teachers, IT contractors, delivery drivers, men with families, men with alibis. But one name stood out. Raymond Hillman, 62, divorced, no children, lived alone in a small house near the edge of the probability zone, employed as a night custodian at a medical office complex. No criminal record, but 8 years ago he had been named in a restraining order filed by a co-worker. The details were sealed. The order had expired after 1 year. No follow-up incidents. I pulled what I could find. Hillman had worked custodial jobs for most of his adult life. Schools, office buildings, hospitals. He moved between employers every few years, never fired. Always left voluntarily. References were neutral. He showed up. He did his work. He did not cause problems. His DMV photo matched the general description. Thin face, pale skin, older white male. But he was not wearing a baseball cap in the photo, and the image was 5 years old. I ran his vehicle registration. He owned a 2005 Toyota Camry, dark green. I called Agent Tran. I told her to put Raymond Hillman at the top of the list. The FBI ran a deeper background. They pulled financial records. Hillman had no significant debts, no unusual purchases. His bank account showed regular deposits from his employer, small withdrawals for groceries and gas, no red flags. But 6 months ago, he had closed a savings account and withdrawn $11,000 in cash. The bank had flagged it as unusual, but it was not illegal. Hillman told the teller he was buying a used car from a private seller. There was no record of a car purchase. Agent Tran obtained a warrant to search Hillman's property. They planned the entry carefully. No sirens, no announcements. A tactical team would go in at dawn. I was told to stay back. This time, I would not be allowed inside the perimeter. I did not argue, but I drove to the location anyway. I parked 3 blocks away and waited. The house was small. Single story, beige siding, a carport with no car underneath. The lawn was mowed. The blinds were drawn. It looked like every other house on the street. The tactical team moved in at 6 in the morning. I watched from a distance. They surrounded the house. 2 officers approached the front door. One knocked. Loud, clear, announced themselves. No response. They knocked again, waited, still nothing. They breached the door. I heard shouting, commands, movement inside, then silence. 10 minutes later, Agent Tran came outside. She looked at me, shook her head. The house was empty, but it had been occupied recently. There was food in the refrigerator, a coffee pot on the counter, still warm, a bed that had been slept in, clothes in the closet, shoes by the door. Raymond Hillman was gone. In the garage, they found the Camry, dark green. License plate matched the registration. The interior had been wiped clean. No fingerprints, no DNA, no personal items. But in the trunk, they found something. A toolbox. Inside the toolbox were zip ties, duct tape, a roll of plastic sheeting, a box cutter, and a small digital camera. The camera had been wiped. No photos, no videos, but the memory card was still inside. The FBI sent it to their tech lab for recovery. In the house, they found more. A laptop, password protected, encrypted hard drive. It would take time to crack. In the bedroom closet, behind a stack of boxes, they found a false panel in the wall. Behind the panel was a small crawl space. Inside the crawl space were more notebooks, 30 of them, all black, all spiral bound, all filled with the same repeated phrases. And underneath the notebooks, there was a folder, a thick manila folder stuffed with documents. Inside were printed profiles, names, addresses, photos, employment records, daily schedules. Maps with handwritten notes. There were 12 profiles in total. Claire Mathis was one of them. Her profile was the most recent. It included the private investigator's report, photos of her leaving the hospital, notes about her routines, her shift times, her route home. Amy Calloway was another. Her profile was older. Notes in the margins indicated observation over several months. The last note was dated 2 days before she disappeared. Rebecca Soames was there too. Her profile included a photo of her daughter. A note next to the photo said, "Complication. Adjust approach." The other 9 profiles were women who had not been reported missing, at least not in connection to this case. The FBI started running the names. 3 of the women were alive. They had moved, changed jobs, left the area. They had no idea they had been targeted. But 6 of the women were missing, reported over the last 7 years. All cold cases, all unsolved. The profile on each missing woman included a note, a single word, written in red ink. Complete. That word meant they were dead. The FBI launched a multi-state search for remains. They used cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar. They searched properties connected to Hillman. They searched areas near the sightings. Over the next 2 weeks, they found 4 more bodies, all female, all consistent with the profiles, all homicides, strangulation, asphyxiation, blunt force trauma. The media coverage exploded. Raymond Hillman's photo was everywhere. The FBI added him to the 10 most wanted list. A reward was offered, $50,000 for information leading to his arrest. But Hillman was gone. His bank accounts were untouched. His phone was off. His car had been left behind. He had disappeared with nothing but the clothes on his back. Or so it seemed. I kept digging. I went back to the restraining order. I contacted the courthouse. The records were sealed, but I found the attorney who had represented the co-worker. She was reluctant to talk, but when I explained the scope of the case, she agreed to meet. Her name was Patricia Gaines. She had been practicing family law for 20 years. She said she remembered the case because it had been unusual. The co-worker, A woman named Diane Marsh had filed the restraining order after months of escalating behavior from Hillman. He had worked at the same medical office complex. He was a night custodian. She was a nurse. Diane said Hillman had started leaving notes on her desk. At first, they were harmless, compliments, observations about her work, but they became more personal. He commented on what she wore, where she parked, who she spoke to. She asked him to stop. He apologized. The note stopped. But then she started noticing him outside her apartment, not close, just across the street, standing, watching. She confronted him. He denied it, said it was a coincidence. He lived nearby. He was just walking. But Diane did not believe him. She started documenting the sightings. She took photos. She kept a log. One night, she came home and found her back door unlocked. She was sure she had locked it. Nothing was missing, nothing disturbed, but her bathroom window was open. She always kept it closed. That was when she filed the restraining order. Patricia said the judge had granted it. Hillman was ordered to stay at least 500 feet away from Diane. He complied. He transferred to a different shift. He stayed away. The order expired after a year. Diane moved to a different state 6 months later. Patricia said she had not thought about the case in years, but hearing about Hillman now, she was not surprised. I asked if she knew where Diane was. Patricia said she had lost touch, but she thought Diane had moved to Arizona, maybe Nevada. I asked if Diane had ever mentioned feeling unsafe after the restraining order expired. Patricia said no. Diane had seemed relieved. She thought it was over. I thanked Patricia and left. I tried to find Diane Marsh. I searched public records, social media, employment databases. I found 3 women with that name in Arizona, 2 in Nevada. None of them matched the age range. I called Patricia back. I asked if Diane had remarried, changed her name. Patricia said she did not know, but she gave me the name of the medical office where Diane had worked. I called the office. The receptionist said Diane had not worked there in 8 years. She did not have forwarding information. She suggested I try the state nursing board. I did. The nursing board had a record of Diane Marsh, license active, last renewed 2 years ago, address listed in Tucson. I called the number on file. It was disconnected. I ran a property search. No one named Diane Marsh owned property in Tucson. I checked rental records, utility records, nothing. Either Diane Marsh had moved again, or she was using a different name, or she was dead. I passed the information to Agent Tran. She said the FBI would follow up, but they were stretched thin. The priority was finding Hillman. I understood, but I could not let it go. I flew to Tucson. I rented a car. I drove to the address listed on the nursing board record. It was an apartment complex. Older, low income. The kind of place where people do not ask questions. I spoke to the property manager. He said Diane Marsh had lived there for 6 months. She had paid rent on time. She kept to herself. One day, She stopped answering her door. He entered the apartment after 2 weeks. It was empty. She had left no forwarding address. She had not collected her security deposit. I asked if he remembered anything unusual. He said no. She had been quiet, polite. He thought maybe she had moved back to family. I asked if he still had her rental application. He said no. Records were only kept for 5 years. I asked if anyone else in the building had known her. He said maybe, but most of the tenants from that time had moved on. I knocked on doors. I spoke to the few long-term residents still there. Most did not remember Diane. One woman said she thought she remembered a nurse who had lived in Building C, but she could not recall any details. I was hitting dead ends. I went back to the property manager. I asked if there had been any incidents at the complex around the time Diane lived there. Break-ins, complaints, police calls. He checked his records. He said there had been one call, a noise complaint. Someone reported hearing shouting from Diane's apartment. Police responded. No one answered the door. The officers checked the perimeter. No signs of disturbance. They left. I asked for the date. He gave it to me. 3 days before Diane stopped paying rent. I called Agent Tran. I told her what I had found. She said the FBI would open a case file on Diane Marsh, but without a body, without evidence of foul play. It was another cold case. I asked if they could cross-reference Diane's description with the unidentified handwriting samples from the notebooks. She said they would try. 2 days later, she called me back. One of the handwriting samples was a potential match. The slant, the pressure, the letter formations. It was not definitive, but it was consistent. If the handwriting was Diane's, it meant she had been taken after she moved to Tucson. It meant Hillman had followed her. It meant the restraining order had not stopped him. It had only delayed him. The FBI added Diane Marsh to the list of presumed victims. They issued a statement. They asked anyone with information to come forward. But I knew no one would. Diane had been alone, isolated. Exactly the kind of person Hillman targeted. I flew back. I was exhausted. The case was consuming everything. I was not sleeping. I was not eating. I was living in motels and rental cars, chasing leads that went nowhere. But I could not stop, because Hillman was still out there, and he was not done. The FBI believed he had gone to ground, that he was hiding, waiting for the attention to die down. But I did not think so. I thought he was already hunting again. The profiles in his house had included 3 women who were still alive. Women who had no idea they had been targeted. The FBI contacted them. They offered protection. 2 of the women accepted. They moved to secure locations. They changed their routines. But the 3rd woman refused. Her name was Kelly Drum. She was 31. She worked as a librarian. She lived alone in a small town 40 miles from where Hillman had lived. Kelly said she appreciated the concern, but she did not want to upend her life because of a threat that might not be real. She said she would be careful. She would lock her doors. She would stay aware. Agent Tran tried to convince her. She explained the severity, the pattern. the other victims. Kelly said she understood, but she was not going to run. The FBI assigned a patrol unit to check her house twice a day. They installed a panic button. They gave her a direct line to the local police, but they could not force her to leave. I called Kelly. I introduced myself. I told her I was working on the case. I asked if I could interview her. She agreed. We met at the library where she worked. It was a small building. Quiet. Smelled like old paper and floor polish. Kelly was calm. Composed. She did not seem frightened. I asked her if she had ever seen Raymond Hillman. She said no. She had never heard of him until the FBI contacted her. I asked if she had noticed anything unusual in the last year. Anyone watching her, following her, strange occurrences. She thought for a moment. Then she said maybe. 6 months ago, she had found a library book in her car. She did not remember checking it out. She brought it back to the library. The system showed it had been checked out to her account, but she had no memory of it. She assumed she had made a mistake. A few weeks later, she noticed her mailbox had been opened. The little flag was up, but she had not put any mail out. She thought maybe the mail carrier had accidentally triggered it. A month ago, she came home and found her kitchen window unlatched. She always kept it latched. She checked the house. Nothing was missing. She assumed the latch had failed. Hearing it all together, she realized it was not a series of mistakes. It was a pattern. I asked if she had told the FBI. She said no. She had not thought about it until now. I told her she needed to tell them. Immediately. She said she would. I asked if she was sure she wanted to stay in her house. She said yes. She said she was not going to let fear control her life. I understood, but I also knew Hillman was patient. He did not rush. He tested. He watched. He waited until the moment was right. And Kelly was giving him time. I reported the conversation to Agent Tran. She increased the patrols. She told Kelly to report anything, any sound, any movement, anything that felt wrong. Kelly agreed. But 2 days later, she stopped answering her phone. The local police went to her house. The door was locked. The windows were secure. They knocked. No answer. They forced entry. The house was empty, but Kelly's car was in the driveway. Her purse was on the kitchen counter. Her phone was on the charger in the bedroom. In the living room, on the coffee table, there was a notebook. Black, spiral bound, open to the first page. The first line had been written. I am fine. The FBI locked down Kelly Drum's house within the hour. Crime scene techs arrived in waves. They photographed everything. They dusted for prints. They swabbed surfaces. They pulled hair and fiber samples from the carpet. The notebook was bagged as evidence. The handwriting was analyzed on site. It matched Kelly's signature from her driver's license. She had written the first line herself. But the context made it clear she had not done it willingly. Agent Tran called me from the scene. Her voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the frustration underneath. She said Hillman had been in the house recently, possibly within the last 6 hours. The kitchen window was unlatched, the same window Kelly had mentioned. The lock mechanism had been tampered with. Someone had bent the latch just enough that it would not catch properly. It looked closed from inside, but a gentle push from outside would open it. That was how he had gotten in. The FBI reviewed the patrol logs. Officers had checked the house twice that day, once at 8 in the morning, once at 3 in the afternoon. Both times, the house had appeared secure. Kelly's car was in the driveway. The officers had not knocked. They had been told to do drive-bys, only unless they saw something suspicious. They had seen nothing. Kelly had last been seen at the library at 5:30. A co-worker said she had seemed normal, maybe a little tired, but not afraid. She had locked up at closing. She had walked to her car. She had driven away. That was the last confirmed sighting. Somewhere between her house and the library, or inside her house after she arrived home, Raymond Hillman had taken her. The FBI issued an Amber Alert-style bulletin. Kelly's photo was circulated, her description, her vehicle information. Roadblocks were set up on major highways. Local police were mobilized. Hospitals and motels were notified. But I knew it was too late. Hillman had been planning this for months. He had tested her windows. He had entered her house multiple times. He had studied her routine. He knew when she would be alone. He knew when the patrols would pass. He had waited until the moment was perfect. And now he had her. The question was where? The FBI revisited the properties. All of them. They searched basements, crawl spaces, sheds, storage units. They found nothing. They expanded the search. They pulled records for every property Hillman had ever lived in, every place he had worked, every address connected to him in any capacity. They found an old hunting cabin. It was listed under his ex-wife's maiden name. She had inherited it from her father 20 years ago. She had forgotten about it. The property taxes had been paid automatically from an old escrow account. The cabin was 3 hours north. Deep woods. No neighbors. Accessible only by a dirt road that washed out every spring. The FBI mobilized a tactical team. I asked if I could go. Agent Tran said no. This was an active operation. No press. No observers. I understood. But I drove up anyway. I parked 2 miles away and hiked in. I stayed back, out of sight. I just wanted to know. The cabin was small. 1 room. A wood stove. Boarded windows. The door was padlocked from the outside. The team cut the lock. They went in fast, guns drawn, shouting commands. The cabin was empty, but it had been used recently. There was a cot, a bucket, a space heater, a stack of canned food, and on the wall, scratched into the wood, were tally marks. Hundreds of them. Someone had been counting days. The FBI processed the scene. They found DNA, hair samples, fingerprints. They ran everything through the database. 2 of the DNA samples matched known victims, women whose bodies had been found in the multi-state search. That meant Hillman had kept them here, in this cabin. for weeks, maybe months. But Kelly Drum was not there, which meant Hillman had moved her somewhere else, or he had already killed her and disposed of the body. The FBI expanded the search radius. They used dogs, drones, infrared cameras. They searched the woods surrounding the cabin. They searched abandoned buildings, old mine shafts, anywhere a body could be hidden. They found nothing. I stayed in the area for 3 days. I talked to locals, park rangers, hunters, anyone who knew the land. An older man named Carl Bittner said he had seen a car on the access road about a week ago. He said it was unusual because no one used that road anymore. The cabin had been abandoned for years. I asked what kind of car. He said a sedan, dark color. He did not get close enough to see the make or model, but he remembered because the driver had not acknowledged him. Most people wave. This person just kept driving. I asked what direction the car was heading. He said deeper into the woods, away from the main road. I asked if there were other structures back there. He said maybe old logging camps, ranger stations that had been decommissioned, but nothing livable. I asked if he could show me on a map. He pulled out a topographical chart. He marked 3 locations. He said those were the only places he knew of that still had standing structures. I passed the information to Agent Tran. She sent teams to each location. The first site was a collapsed logging shed. Nothing inside but rotted wood and rust. The second site was an old ranger station. Roof caved in, walls leaning, unsafe to enter. They checked it anyway. Empty. The third site was further out, almost 5 miles from the cabin, accessible only by foot or ATV. The team hiked in. They found a trailer, old, faded paint, parked in a clearing. The windows were covered with foil. The door was locked. They forced it open. Inside, they found Kelly Drum. She was alive. Barely. She was restrained. Zip ties around her wrists and ankles. A gag in her mouth. She was dehydrated. Disoriented, but conscious. On the floor next to her was a notebook. Black. Spiral bound. Half filled with writing. I am fine. I am safe. I do not need help. The same phrases, over and over, pages of them. Kelly was airlifted to a hospital. She was treated for dehydration, malnutrition, and shock. She had ligature marks on her wrists and ankles, bruising on her arms, but no life-threatening injuries. Physically, she would recover. Psychologically, that was another question. The FBI interviewed her as soon as the doctors cleared it. I was not allowed in the room, but Agent Tran briefed me afterward. Kelly said Hillman had been waiting in her house when she got home. He had come through the kitchen window. He had been calm, polite. He told her not to scream. He told her he was not going to hurt her if she cooperated. He made her write the first line in the notebook. Then he walked her to his car. He told her to get in the trunk. She complied. She was too afraid to fight. He drove for hours. She lost track of time. When he finally stopped, he pulled her out. They were in the woods. It was dark. He walked her to the trailer. He tied her up. He left the notebook and a pen. told her to write. He said if she filled the pages, he would let her go. She did not believe him, but she wrote anyway, because she did not know what else to do. He came back twice, once to bring water, once to bring food. Each time, he checked the notebook. He counted the pages. He did not speak. He did not speak. Kelly said she tried to talk to him. She asked why he was doing this. She asked what he wanted. He did not answer. He just stared at her. Then he left. She said the worst part was not the fear. It was the silence, the waiting, not knowing if he was coming back, not knowing if he would let her go or if she would die there. Agent Tran asked if Kelly had seen where Hillman went when he left. Kelly said no, but she heard a car engine. She thought he was driving away, but she was not sure. Agent Tran asked if Hillman had said anything at all. Kelly hesitated. Then she said yes, once. The last time he visited, he looked at the notebook. He flipped through the pages. Then he looked at Kelly, and he said, "You are doing better than the others." That was all. Then he left. Kelly said she did not understand what he meant, but it terrified her, because it meant there had been others, and she was being compared to them. The FBI processed the trailer. They found fingerprints, DNA, hair samples, all matched Raymond Hillman. They also found something else. In a storage compartment under the trailer's bench seat, they found a box. Inside the box were driver's licenses, 12 of them, all women. All matched the profiles found in Hillman's house. Trophies. Each license had a date written on the back in black marker. The dates ranged from 9 years ago to 6 months ago. The FBI cross-referenced the names. All 12 women were confirmed missing. Some had been found, some had not. But the dates told a story. Hillman had been doing this for nearly a decade, and he had been escalating. The time between abductions had been shrinking. The first few had been spaced years apart, but in the last 2 years, the intervals had dropped to months, sometimes weeks. He was accelerating, losing control, or gaining confidence. Either way, it meant he was more dangerous now than he had ever been. The FBI issued a national alert. Hillman's face was on every news channel, every website, every social media feed. The reward was increased to $100,000. Tips poured in, thousands of them. Most were useless. Sightings that did not pan out. Rumors, speculation. But one tip stood out. A woman in a town 2 states away said she had rented a room to a man matching Hillman's description. He had paid cash. He used a fake name. He kept to himself. He left after 3 days. But before he left, she had seen him loading something into his car. A large duffel bag. Heavy. He struggled to lift it. She thought it was strange, but she did not say anything. She thought maybe he was a tradesman. Tools, equipment. But now, Seeing his face on the news, she realized it could have been something else. The FBI went to the rental property. They interviewed the woman. She showed them the room Hillman had stayed in. The room had been cleaned, but the forensics team found traces. A single hair on the pillowcase matched Hillman's DNA. They also found something in the closet, a small notebook, black, spiral bound, empty, unused. He had brought it with him, and he had left it behind. That meant he was preparing for the next victim. The FBI traced his movements from the rental property. They pulled security footage from nearby gas stations, convenience stores, ATMs. They found him on camera twice, once filling up his car, once buying food at a truck stop. In both clips, he was alone, calm, unremarkable. He paid cash. He did not speak to anyone. He got back in his car and drove away. But in the second clip, there was something in the back seat, a shape, covered with a blanket. The FBI enhanced the image. They could not confirm what it was, but the size and contour suggested a person, sitting upright, not moving. That clip was time-stamped 4 days ago, which meant Hillman might already have another victim. The FBI mobilized every available resource. They tracked the direction Hillman had been traveling, east, toward the coast. They alerted law enforcement in every jurisdiction along the route. But Hillman was careful. He avoided toll roads. He stayed off major highways. He used back roads, rural routes, places without cameras. He knew how to disappear. I stayed close to the investigation. I was exhausted, but I could not stop, because every hour that passed was another hour someone might be trapped, scared, waiting. Agent Tran called me late one night. She said the FBI had received a call from a police department in a small coastal town. A woman had been reported missing. She fit the profile, lived alone, worked night shifts, no family nearby. Her name was Sarah Linden. She was 29. She worked as a waitress at an all-night diner. She had last been seen leaving work at 3 in the morning. She had walked to her car. She had driven away. She never made it home. Her car was found 6 hours later in a beach parking lot. The keys were in the ignition. Her apron was folded on the passenger seat. Her phone was on the dashboard, powered off. There were no signs of struggle, no witnesses, no surveillance cameras in the area. But on the driver's seat, there was a notebook, black, spiral bound, open to the first page. One line had been written, "I am fine." The handwriting matched Sarah Linden's signature from her employment records. Raymond Hillman had taken another victim. And this time, the FBI knew exactly what he was doing. They knew his pattern. They knew his methods. They knew the endgame. But they still did not know where he was. The coastal town was small, population less than 5,000, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where strangers were noticed. The FBI canvassed the area. They showed Hillman's photo. They asked about recent visitors, unusual activity, anything out of place. A motel clerk said a man matching Hillman's description had checked in 2 days ago. He had paid cash. He had asked, for a room on the ground floor, rear of the building, away from the main road. He had not been seen since check-in. The FBI surrounded the motel. They evacuated the other guests. They cleared the surrounding buildings. Then they breached Hillman's room. It was empty, but it had been occupied recently. The bed was unmade. There was a half-empty bottle of water on the nightstand. A receipt from a local hardware store on the dresser. The FBI checked the hardware store. The receipt was for rope, duct tape, a tarp, purchased the day before. The store clerk remembered the transaction. He said the man had been quiet, polite. He paid cash. He carried the items out to his car, a dark sedan. The clerk said the car had been parked in the far corner of the lot. He had noticed, because most people parked closer to the entrance. The FBI pulled the store's security footage. They found Hillman on camera. He was wearing a baseball cap, sunglasses, a jacket, but it was him. And in the back seat of his car, visible through the rear window, was a shape, a person, sitting upright, not moving. Sarah Linden. The timestamp was 16 hours old. The FBI traced the route from the hardware store. They followed the likely paths. They searched abandoned buildings, empty lots, beach access points. They found the car an hour later, parked behind a condemned fish processing plant on the edge of town. The building had been closed for years, boarded up, marked for demolition. The tactical team surrounded the building. They moved in carefully. The interior was dark, rusted equipment, concrete floors, the smell of salt and rot. They searched room by room, calling out, listening, moving slowly. In the back corner, they found a stairwell. It led down to a basement. The door at the bottom was locked from the outside. They breached it. Inside, they found Sarah Linden. She was alive. She was restrained, gagged, terrified, but alive. And she was not alone. Across the room, sitting on a folding chair, was Raymond Hillman. He was calm. His hands were folded in his lap. He did not move. He did not speak. The officers shouted commands. Hillman did not respond. He just sat there, watching. One of the officers approached, weapon drawn, ordering Hillman to stand, to put his hands up. Hillman smiled. Then he reached into his jacket. The officers fired. 3 shots. Center mass. Hillman fell backward. The chair tipped. He hit the floor. The officers moved in. They kicked the weapon away. Except there was no weapon. Hillman's hand had been empty. He had reached for nothing. He had made them shoot him. Paramedics were called. But it was too late. Raymond Hillman was dead. Sarah Linden was freed. She was taken to the hospital, treated, interviewed. She would survive. But the case was not over. Because in Hillman's jacket pocket, they found a piece of paper, folded, handwritten. It was a list. 23 names, all women. Addresses next to each name. Dates next to each address. 12 of the names had a line drawn through them. Those were the confirmed victims. The women who had been found. The women who had died. 11 names had no line, which meant they were still out there, still missing, still unaccounted for. The FBI began the process of locating them. Some were alive. They had moved, changed their lives. They had no idea they had been on Hillman's list. But 3 of the women could not be found. The search continued. And in the silence left by Hillman's death, the question remained. How many others were there? How many names had he never written down? How many women had he watched, studied, and let go? And why? The days after Raymond Hillman's death were strange. The media called it a resolution. The FBI held press conferences. The families of the confirmed victims were notified. Some found closure. Some found only more questions. But I could not shake the feeling that we were missing something. Hillman had been methodical, controlled, patient. Everything he did had a purpose. Everything was planned. So why had he forced the officers to shoot him? Why had he smiled? Why had he reached for nothing? It did not fit. I went back through the evidence. I reviewed the profiles, the notebooks, the timelines. I looked for gaps, inconsistencies, anything that suggested we had not seen the whole picture. And I found something. The property records for the houses Hillman had used showed a pattern, but there was an anomaly. One property had been purchased under a different LLC. The paperwork was similar, but not identical. The closing had been handled by a different title company, a different realtor. No connection to Gerald Finch. Agent Tran had flagged it during the initial sweep, but because the house had been empty and clean, it had been deprioritized. There was no hidden room, no evidence, just another vacant property. But now, looking at it again, I noticed something. The purchase date was 2 weeks before Hillman had rented the storage unit, which meant it had been acquired early in his operational timeline. And early acquisitions usually meant something different. A test site, a planning location, or a safe house. I called Agent Tran. I told her I wanted to check the property again. She said it had already been cleared. I said I understood, but I wanted to see it anyway. She sighed. Then she said she would meet me there. The house was in a rural area, 15 miles outside the nearest town, surrounded by farmland. No neighbors within sight. The kind of place where you could scream and no one would hear. Agent Tran arrived with 2 other agents. They unlocked the door. We went inside. The house was clean, empty, the same as the others. Furniture arranged neatly, surfaces wiped, no personal items, no clutter. But this time, I was not looking for evidence of captivity. I was looking for something else. I walked through each room slowly. I checked closets. I opened cabinets. I looked for anything that felt intentional, placed, deliberate. In the kitchen, I found it. A drawer that did not open all the way. It caught on something. I pulled it out completely. Behind it, taped to the back panel, was an envelope. Inside the envelope was a key. Small, brass. No label, no markings. I showed it to Agent Tran. She said it could be anything. A safe deposit box, a locker, a mailbox. Without more information, it was useless. But I did not think Hillman would have hidden a key, unless it mattered. I asked the agents to search the rest of the house. Look for anything that might indicate what the key opened. Safes, lockboxes, hidden compartments. They searched for an hour. They found nothing. But then one of the agents noticed something. In the basement, there was a utility closet. Inside the closet was a water heater. Standard, unremarkable. But the floor around the water heater had been disturbed. The concrete was newer, a different shade. They moved the water heater. Underneath there was a metal plate, bolted down. A keyhole in the center. The key fit. They opened it. Below the plate was a shaft, a ladder built into the side. It descended into darkness. Agent Tran called for backup. She called for equipment, lights, radios, a tactical team. We waited. When the team arrived, they descended first. I stayed above, watching, listening. After 10 minutes, one of the officers radioed up. He said we needed to see this. I climbed down. The shaft dropped about 15 feet. At the bottom was a tunnel, hand dug, reinforced with wooden beams. It extended in one direction, away from the house. The tunnel was narrow, low ceiling. The walls were damp. It smelled like earth and rot. We followed it, flashlights cutting through the dark. The tunnel ran for about 50 yards. Then it opened into a room. The room was larger than the hidden spaces in the other houses, about 10 feet by 12 feet. The walls were concrete, poured, reinforced. This was not a temporary space, this was permanent. Inside the room were shelves, metal shelving units, industrial, the kind you would find in a warehouse. The shelves were filled with boxes, plastic storage bins, labeled, dated. We started opening them. The first box contained notebooks, dozens of them, all black, all spiral bound, all filled with the same repeated phrases. The second box contained photographs, hundreds of them, printed on photo paper, different women, different locations, different years. The third box contained clothing, women's clothing, shirts, shoes, a jacket, each item in a separate plastic bag, labeled with a name and a date. Trophies. But there was more. In the back corner of the room, there was a desk. On the desk was a laptop, closed, unplugged. Next to the laptop was a folder, thick, stuffed with papers. Stuffed with papers. Agent Tran opened the folder. Inside were detailed logs, handwritten entries, dates, times, locations, observations. Every entry was clinical, precise, emotionless. The logs went back 12 years. 12 years of surveillance, 12 years of planning, 12 years of selecting, watching, and taking. The laptop was seized. The FBI's tech team would attempt to crack it, but even without the laptop, the folder alone contained enough information to connect Hillman to at least 30 potential victims. 30. The scope of the case had just tripled. Agent Tran stood in the center of the room. She looked around. She did not say anything. She did not need to. We were standing in the archive of a serial predator who had been operating undetected for over a decade. And we had almost missed it. The FBI began the process of identifying the victims. They cross-referenced the logs with missing person reports. They matched photographs to known cases. They tracked down the women in the clothing items. Some were found. Some were confirmed deceased. Some were still missing. But the logs revealed something else. Something that changed the entire understanding of the case. Raymond Hillman had not been working alone. The logs included entries written in a different hand, a second person. The handwriting was distinct, smaller, neater, more controlled. The entries were shorter, observational. They detailed surveillance activities, locations, times, patterns. But they were signed, a single initial at the end of each entry. G. His half-this buckaroons had a low and more hard space, and they break the place. The foremost sistered someone until bogger, and he pressed, and his coursed them. Before he won is a higher. His seem swords before fights to anti-narration, and his same time ising more of him. Gerald Finch. The FBI had assumed Finch was dead, that Hillman had killed him to tie up loose ends, but the log suggested something different. Finch had not been a victim. He had been a partner. The log showed a division of labor. Hillman handled the properties, the abductions, the control. Finch handled the logistics, the research. The surveillance. They had been working together from the beginning, which meant Finch might still be alive. The FBI reopened the search for Gerald Finch. They reissued alerts. They added him to the 10 most wanted list. They increased the reward. But Finch had been gone for weeks. And if he had been planning his disappearance as carefully as he had planned everything else, he would be nearly impossible to find. I went back to Finch's ex-wife. I called her. I told her the FBI believed Finch was still alive. I asked if she had any idea where he might go. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said maybe. She said Finch had a sister. They had not spoken in years. She lived somewhere in Canada, near the border. Finch had mentioned her once, said she was the only family he had left. I asked if she remembered the sister's name. She said no, but she thought it started with an M. Margaret, maybe Marianne. I passed the information to Agent Tran. The FBI contacted Canadian authorities. They ran searches for women with last name Finch or any known aliases. They found 3 possibilities. One was deceased. One was in a nursing home. The third was living in a small town in British Columbia. Her name was Marlene Finch. Age 58. Lived alone. Owned a small property. Worked part-time at a local library. The FBI coordinated with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. They conducted surveillance on Marlene's property. They watched for activity, unusual visitors, vehicles. For 3 days, they saw nothing. Marlene went to work, came home, kept to herself. But on the 4th day, a car pulled into her driveway. A sedan, older model, dark blue. A man got out. He was carrying a bag. He went inside. He did not come out. The RCMP moved in. They surrounded the property. They knocked on the door, announced themselves. Marlene answered. She was calm, cooperative. She said yes. Her brother was inside. She said he had arrived a few days ago. He said he needed a place to stay. She had not asked questions. The officers entered. They found Gerald Finch in the back bedroom. He was sitting on the bed, hands folded, waiting. He did not resist. He did not speak. He just stood up and let them cuff him. He was extradited to the United States. He was charged with multiple counts of kidnapping, conspiracy to commit murder, and accessory to murder. During the initial interrogation, Finch said nothing. He invoked his right to an attorney. He sat in silence. But after 2 days, he changed his mind. He said he wanted to talk, but only to one person. He asked for me. Agent Tran called me. She said Finch had requested an interview. She said it was unusual. Suspects did not usually ask for journalists. But Finch had been specific. He would only talk to me. I asked why. She said she did not know. But she said the FBI would allow it. Under supervision. Recorded. With an attorney present. I agreed. The interview took place in a federal holding facility. Finch was brought into the room in handcuffs. He looked smaller than I expected. Thinner. Older. He wore an orange jumpsuit. His hair was grey. His face was pale. He sat down across from me. He looked at me for a long time. Then he smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who knew something you did not. I asked him why he wanted to talk to me. He said because I was the one who found the tunnel. I was the one who kept looking when everyone else had stopped. He said he respected that. I asked him why he had worked with Raymond Hillman. He said because Hillman understood. Understood what? He said, control. Finch said, people think they have control over their lives, but they do not. They move through routines, patterns, predictable, controllable. He said Hillman saw that, and he saw opportunity. I asked if Finch felt remorse. For the women, for the families. He said no. He said they were part of a system, a process. He said he and Hillman were simply executing a design. He said the women were not victims. They were participants. I asked what he meant. He said the women had been given a choice. Cooperate or resist. Write or refuse. Stay quiet or scream. He said the ones who cooperated lasted longer. The ones who resisted did not. He said that was control. That was proof of the system working. I asked him how many women they had taken. He said he did not know. He said he stopped counting after the first year. He said Hillman kept better records. I asked if there were more victims we had not found. He smiled again. He said, "Probably." I asked where. He said he did not remember. He said there were so many properties, so many locations. Some had been sold, some had been abandoned, some were still active. I asked what he meant by active. He said exactly what it sounded like. There might still be someone out there, right now, waiting. Agent Tran stopped the interview. She said Finch was playing games, trying to create fear, trying to stay relevant. But I was not sure, because Finch had been methodical. He had been part of this operation for over a decade, and if he said there were more locations, I believed him. The FBI expanded the search. They pulled every property record connected to any LLC that Hillman or Finch had been associated with. They found 6 more properties. 5 were clear, but the 6th property was different. It was a farmhouse, isolated. The utilities had been active until 2 months ago. Then they had been shut off. No forwarding address, no contact information. The FBI obtained a warrant. They sent a team. The farmhouse was old, peeling paint, sagging roof, but structurally sound. The door was locked. They breached it. Inside, the house was empty, but it had been occupied recently. There were food wrappers, empty water bottles, a sleeping bag on the floor. In the basement, they found another hidden room, smaller than the others, crudely built. The walls were plywood. The door was a sheet of metal held in place with a padlock. They cut the lock. Inside, they found a cot, a bucket, a notebook, and on the wall, scratched into the plywood, a name: Vanessa. The FBI ran the name. They cross-referenced it with missing person reports. They found a match. Vanessa Ortiz, 26, reported missing 4 months ago. Last seen leaving her apartment. No witnesses, no leads. The farmhouse was in the same county where Vanessa had lived. The FBI searched the property. They used dogs, ground-penetrating radar. They searched the surrounding land. 3 days later, they found her. She was buried in a shallow grave behind the barn. Cause of death was asphyxiation. She had been dead for approximately 3 months. The notebook found in the hidden room was filled with her handwriting, the same repeated phrases, pages and pages, until the writing stopped. Vanessa Ortiz became the confirmed 18th victim. But the search was not over, because the laptop from the underground room had finally been cracked. The FBI's tech team had bypassed the encryption. They had accessed the files. What they found was worse than anyone had anticipated. The laptop contained videos, hundreds of them, surveillance footage, recordings of the hidden rooms, recordings of the women writing in the notebooks, recordings of Hillman and Finch entering, watching, speaking. The videos were time-stamped, dated, labeled. Some of the women in the videos had been identified, some had not. But there was one video that stood out. It was recent, filmed 6 weeks ago. It showed a woman in a hidden room. She was writing in a notebook, but she was not alone. there was someone else in the room. A third person, standing in the corner, watching. The figure was partially obscured, but visible enough to see it was not Hillman, and it was not Finch. It was someone else. A third person had been involved. The FBI enhanced the video. They isolated the figure. They analyzed the height, the build, the posture. It was a woman. The realization hit like a cold wave. Hillman and Finch had not been working alone. There had been someone else. Someone who had stayed in the shadows. Someone who had never appeared in the logs. Never been photographed. Never been identified. Until now. The FBI reviewed all the evidence again, looking for traces of a third person. Fingerprints that did not match. DNA samples that had been overlooked. Witnesses who had mentioned seeing a woman. They found something. In the storage unit, among the boxes of notebooks, there was a single strand of hair. Long, dark. It had been tested during the initial sweep. The DNA had been run through the database. No match. But now, with the video evidence, they ran it again. This time, they expanded the parameters. They included familial matches. They got a hit. The DNA was a partial match to Gerald Finch, a sibling, or a close relative, Marlene Finch. The RCMP had released Marlene after Gerald's arrest. She had not been charged. There was no evidence tying her to the crimes. She had cooperated fully. She had seemed genuinely surprised by her brother's activities. But now, the FBI was not so sure. They contacted Canadian authorities. They requested that Marlene be brought in for questioning. But when the RCMP went to her house, she was gone. Her car was missing. Her belongings were gone. The house was empty. She had disappeared. The FBI issued an international warrant. Marlene Finch was now wanted for questioning in connection with multiple homicides. But she had a head start, and she knew how to disappear because she had learned from the best. The case was no longer closed. It was evolving, expanding. The investigation that had seemed finished was now open-ended again. And somewhere, Marlene Finch was out there, free, watching, waiting. The revelation that Marlene Finch had been involved from the beginning forced a complete reassessment of the case. Every assumption we had made about Hillman and Gerald Finch being a two-person operation was wrong. Marlene had been the invisible third, the one who had stayed off the records, the one who had never been photographed, the one who had watched from the shadows while her brother and Hillman did the work. But her role was not passive. The video from the laptop proved that. She had been in the rooms. She had been present during the captivity. She had watched the women write. She had been part of the control mechanism. Agent Tran assembled a task force specifically focused on finding Marlene. They pulled her financial records, her travel history, her employment records, her social connections. What they found was disturbing. Marlene Finch had been moving between the United States and Canada for years. She held dual citizenship. She had worked a series of low-profile jobs. Library assistant, data entry clerk, home health aide, jobs that gave her access to personal information, jobs that required background checks. which she had passed cleanly every time. She had no criminal record, no history of violence, no red flags. She had been invisible by design. Her financial records showed a pattern: small cash withdrawals, regular but not excessive. She lived modestly. She did not own property in her own name. She rented month to month. She moved every few years. But there were gaps, periods where her activity dropped to almost nothing. No bank transactions, no employment records. Weeks or months where she simply disappeared from the grid. The FBI cross-referenced those gaps with the timelines of the abductions. They matched. Every time Marlene went dark, a woman went missing. She had been part of the operation the entire time, not just an accessory, not just a facilitator. She had been active, hands-on, and she had been better at hiding than either of the men. I went back through my notes. I reviewed every interview, every witness statement, looking for any mention of a woman, any sighting that had been dismissed. And I found something. One of the neighbors on Mapleton Drive, an older man named Patrick Ellison, had mentioned seeing a woman once. It had been a passing comment. He said he had seen a woman getting out of a car in front of the house at 428 Mapleton. He said it was unusual because the man who lived there never had visitors. I had noted it at the time, but I had not followed up because the focus had been on the man in the baseball cap. The woman had seemed irrelevant. I called Patrick. I asked him if he remembered what the woman looked like. He said vaguely, older, maybe 50s, average height. She'd been wearing a jacket and a scarf. She had walked up to the house. She had used a key to get in. I asked when this had been. He said maybe 6 months ago, maybe longer. He could not be sure. I asked if he had seen her leave. He said no. He had gone inside. When he looked out later, the car was gone. I asked if he remembered what kind of car. He said a sedan, dark color, nothing distinctive. I asked if he would recognize the woman if he saw her again. He said maybe, if the angle was right. I sent him a photo of Marlene Finch. It was the only recent photo the RCMP had on file, taken from her library employment ID. Patrick called me back an hour later. He said it could be her. He was not certain, but the face looked familiar. I reported it to Agent Tran. She said it was not enough for a warrant, but it was another data point, another piece that fit. The FBI broadened the search. They reached out to law enforcement across North America. They distributed Marlene's photo. They issued alerts at border crossings. They monitored airports, train stations, bus terminals. But Marlene had been planning this. She had known the investigation was closing in. She had known Gerald had been arrested. And she had disappeared before anyone realized she was part of it. The FBI believed she had crossed into Mexico or flown to Europe, somewhere without extradition treaties, somewhere she could vanish completely. But I was not convinced, because Marlene had spent over a decade operating in the shadows. She had been patient, methodical. She had not made mistakes. And people like that do not run when they are in control. They adapt. I started looking at the case from a different angle. What if Marlene had not run? What if she had simply moved? I went back to the property records. I looked for recent purchases, rentals, leases, anything that matched the pattern. Quiet neighborhoods, isolated locations, month-to-month agreements. I found 12 properties that fit. The FBI checked them. All were occupied. All had verifiable tenants. None matched Marlene's description. But one property stood out. A small rental house in a town 200 miles from where Hillman had been killed. The tenant had moved in 3 weeks ago, paid first and last month's rent in cash. No credit check, no references, just a signed lease and cash. The landlord said the tenant was a woman, older, quiet, kept to herself. She said her name was Margaret Hollis. The FBI ran the name. It did not exist. No social security number, no employment history, no records. A ghost. Agent Tran obtained a warrant. They moved quickly. A tactical team surrounded the property at dawn. They breached the door. The house was empty, but it had been occupied within the last 24 hours. There was fresh food in the refrigerator, a coffee cup in the sink, a bed that had been slept in. In the bedroom closet, they found a suitcase. Inside the suitcase were clothes. A wig, glasses, fake IDs, 3 different names, 3 different faces, all with Marlene's photo. She had been there, and she had left just before they arrived, which meant she had been tipped off, or she had been watching. The FBI swept the house for surveillance equipment. They found cameras, 3 of them, hidden in smoke detectors, in air vents, in the bathroom mirror. The cameras were wireless, transmitting to a remote server. Marlene had been watching the house in real time. She had seen the FBI coming, and she had walked out the back door while they were breaching the front. Agent Tran was furious. She said Marlene was playing them, staying 1 step ahead, using their own tactics against them. But I saw something else. Marlene was not just running, she was testing. She wanted to see how close we could get. She wanted to know if we were good enough to catch her. And so far, we were not. The FBI analyzed the camera feeds. They traced the server. It was hosted overseas, encrypted, routed through multiple proxies, untraceable. But the tech team found something. The cameras had a buffer, a local storage cache that held the last 72 hours of footage before uploading to the server. They recovered the footage. It showed Marlene moving through the house, cooking, reading, sleeping. She looked calm, unbothered. Like she was on vacation. But there was one moment that changed everything. In the footage, Marlene was sitting at the kitchen table. She was writing in a notebook, black, spiral, bound, the same kind Hillman had used. She filled 3 pages. Then she closed the notebook. She stood up. She walked to the front door. She opened it. She placed the notebook on the porch. Then she went back inside. The timestamp was 6 hours before the FBI arrived. She had left the notebook for us. The tactical team had found it. They had bagged it as evidence, but no one had read it yet. It was still in processing. Agent Tran pulled the notebook from evidence. She opened it. The pages were filled with writing, but it was not the repeated phrases. It was a letter, addressed to me. The letter was handwritten, neat, controlled, the same handwriting from the logs. It read, his file for Spucker movement and all along the hearth. He lay prey to grey the press. Before was just someone so corner, and he pressed, and his costly. The filing loose of the hinds to battley, each braid. Killiston. He sees himself a found fights to Antis Tyson, and his strange chine. You have done well, better than I expected. You found the tunnel. You found the laptop. You connected Gerald. You are persistent. I admire that. But you are looking in the wrong places. You think I am running. You think I am scared. You think this is over. It is not over. Raymond is dead. Gerald is in custody. But the work continues, because the work was never about them. It was about the system, the process. The control. You want to understand? Then understand this. People are predictable. They follow patterns. They make choices. And choices have consequences. The women you found were not victims. They were part of an experiment, a study, a demonstration of how easily control can be established, how quickly resistance collapses, how completely a person can be reprogrammed. Some adapted, some did not. The ones who adapted lived longer. The ones who resisted did not. That is not cruelty. That is data. You think I am a monster, but I am a scientist. I observe, I document, I refine, and I am not finished. There are more. You have not found them all. You will not find them all, because you do not know where to look. But I will give you a gift. A clue, a test. One of the women you think is dead is not. She is alive. Right now, waiting. She has been waiting for months, and if you do not find her soon, she will not be alive much longer. Her name is in the logs. Her location is in the files. But you have to know what you are looking for. Good luck. M. The letter ended there. Agent Tran read it twice. Then she handed it to me. She said, "Is she serious?" I did not answer, because I did not know. But I knew we had to assume she was. The FBI pulled every file, every log, every notebook. They cross-referenced names with confirmed victims. They looked for discrepancies, entries that did not match. Women who had been marked as dead, but whose bodies had not been found. They found 3 possibilities. The first was a woman named Jessica Lane, reported missing 5 years ago. Her name appeared in Hillman's logs. Her photo was in the laptop files. But her body had never been found. The FBI had assumed she was dead. But there was no proof. The second was a woman named Brianna Cole, missing for 3 years. Same pattern. Logs, photos, no body. The third was a woman named Holly Vance, missing for 18 months. Logs, photos, no body. If Marlene was telling the truth, one of these women was still alive and still captive. The FBI mobilized every resource. They revisited the properties. They searched surrounding areas. They used cadaver dogs, drones. Infrared. They found nothing. But then I remembered something. Marlene's letter had said her location is in the files. Not in the logs, in the files. The laptop had contained more than just videos. It had contained documents, spreadsheets, maps. The FBI had gone through most of it. But not all of it. Some files had been corrupted. Some had been password protected and were still being decrypted. I asked Agent Tran if I could see the files. She hesitated. Then she agreed. I spent 2 days going through everything: financial records, property deeds, surveillance schedules, purchase orders, lists of supplies. And then I found it. Buried in a subfolder labeled Maintenance Logs, there was a spreadsheet. It tracked expenses for each property: utilities, repairs, supplies. But one property had entries that did not match the others. The utility costs were higher. The supply orders were more frequent, and the entries continued past the date when the property had supposedly been abandoned. The property was listed under an LLC I did not recognize. I cross-referenced it. It had been registered 8 years ago, dissolved 2 years ago. But the property had never been sold. It was still active, off the books, hidden in the paperwork. I gave the address to Agent Tran. She ran it through the system. The property was a cabin, deep in the mountains, accessible only by logging roads. No utilities on record, no recent activity. But the spreadsheet said otherwise. The FBI sent a team. They hiked in. The cabin was small, old. The windows were boarded. The door was padlocked. The door was padlocked. They breached it. Inside, they found a hidden door. Behind the door was a staircase, leading down. At the bottom was a room, concrete walls, a single light bulb, a cot, a bucket. And on the cot, barely conscious, was a woman. She was alive. Her name was Jessica Lane. She had been there for 5 years. Jessica Lane was airlifted to a trauma center. She was severely malnourished, dehydrated. Her muscles had atrophied from years of confinement. She had infections, vitamin deficiencies, psychological trauma that would take years to process, if it ever could be. But she was alive. The doctors said it was a miracle. 5 years in captivity, 5 years in a room with minimal light, minimal human contact, minimal hope. Most people would not have survived, but Jessica had. The FBI interviewed her as soon as she was stable enough to speak. I was not allowed in the room, but Agent Tran briefed me afterward. Jessica said She remembered very little of the abduction. She had been walking to her car after work. Someone had come up behind her. She felt a prick in her neck. Then, nothing. She woke up in the room, restrained. A woman was standing over her. Not a man, a woman. The woman told her the rules. Stay quiet. Do what you are told. Write in the notebook every day. If you cooperate, you will be fed. If you resist, you will not. Jessica said she resisted at first. She screamed. She refused to write. She tried to break free. The woman stopped bringing food. Jessica went 3 days without eating, 4 days without water. She thought she was going to die. On the 5th day, the woman came back. She brought water. She brought food. She said, "Are you ready to cooperate now?" Jessica said yes. After that, she wrote. Every day, pages and pages. The same phrases over and over. I am fine. I am safe. I do not need help. She said the woman came once a week, sometimes twice. She would check the notebook, count the pages. If Jessica had written enough, she would bring supplies. Food, water, a bucket to replace the old one. If Jessica had not written enough, the woman would leave without saying anything. Jessica said there were long periods where no one came. Weeks, maybe months. She lost track of time. The light never changed. There were no windows, no way to tell day from night. She said she thought about dying. She thought about giving up, but something in her refused. Some small part of her that kept believing she would be found. And she was. Agent Tran asked Jessica if she had ever seen a man, anyone besides the woman. Jessica said no, only the woman. Agent Tran showed Jessica a photo of Marlene Finch. Jessica started shaking. She said that was her. That was the woman. Agent Tran asked if Marlene had ever said anything else, anything that might indicate where she was going, where she might be now. Jessica said no. Marlene never spoke about herself. She never explained why. She just enforced the rules. But Jessica remembered one thing. The last time Marlene visited, about 3 weeks ago, she had seemed different. Distracted. She checked the notebook quickly. She left the supplies. And as she was leaving, she said something under her breath. Jessica said she barely heard it, but it sounded like, "It is almost time." Agent Tran asked what that meant. Jessica said she did not know, but it had scared her, because it sounded final. The FBI analyzed the phrase. They considered possibilities. Almost time for what? To move? To disappear? To finish something? They did not know, but it suggested Marlene had a plan, a timeline, an endgame. And whatever it was close. The discovery of Jessica Lane dominated the news cycle. The media called it a miracle rescue. Families of other missing women began calling the FBI, asking if their loved ones might still be alive, asking if there were other hidden rooms, other locations. The FBI could not promise anything, but they continued searching. They checked every property, every lead, every possibility. But they found no one else, which left 2 names unaccounted for: Brianna Cole, Holly Vance. Were they dead? Were they still out there? The FBI did not know. And Marlene was not offering any more clues. I kept digging. I went back to the spreadsheet. I looked for other anomalies, other properties with suspicious activity. I found one. A storage facility. Not a unit like the one Hillman had rented. This was a private facility. A large warehouse on the outskirts of an industrial area. The LLC that owned it had been dissolved, but the property taxes were still being paid, automatically, from an offshore account. The FBI obtained a warrant. They brought a tactical team. They breached the warehouse. Inside, the main floor was empty. Concrete, dust, rusted equipment. But in the back corner, there was a freight elevator. Old, manual, still functional. They took it down. The basement level was massive, a maze of storage cages, metal fencing, padlocked doors, the kind of setup used for long-term commercial storage. The team searched methodically. Most of the cages were empty, but one was not. Inside, they found boxes, dozens of them, all labeled, all organized. The boxes contained notebooks, thousands of them, far more than had been found in the other locations. They also found files, medical records, psychological evaluations, research notes, all handwritten, all in Marlene's handwriting. The files were clinical, detached. They detailed observations of each victim, behavioral patterns, responses to isolation, progression of compliance, breaking points. Marlene had been documenting everything, not as a crime, as a study. One file stood out. It was thicker than the others, labeled Subject 0. Inside was a profile. A woman named Emily Hackett, missing for 14 years, before Hillman, before Gerald. Before any of the other victims. The file suggested Emily had been the first. The test case, the proof of concept. The file included photos. Emily at different stages of captivity. Week 1, month 1, year 1. The progression was horrifying. The transformation from a terrified woman to someone who looked hollow, empty. The last photo was dated 10 years ago. Emily was sitting on a cot, staring at the camera. No expression, no emotion. The file ended with a single note. Subject deceased. Natural causes. Failure to adapt. The FBI cross-referenced the name. Emily Hackett had been reported missing 14 years ago. Her case had gone cold almost immediately. No witnesses, no evidence, no leads. Her body had never been found. Agent Tran asked if the warehouse had been searched for remains. The team said yes. They had used cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar. They found nothing, which meant Emily had been disposed of somewhere else, and Marlene was the only one who knew where. The discovery of the warehouse files changed the timeline of the case. Marlene had not been brought in by Hillman or Gerald. She had been the architect. She had started the operation. She had recruited them. The FBI built a new profile. Marlene Finch was not an accessory. She was the primary offender. Hillman and Gerald had been her tools, her assistants, her enforcers. She had used them, and when they became liabilities, she had let them fall. Hillman had forced the police to kill him. Gerald had been arrested, and Marlene had walked away, free, undetected, until now. But even now, she was still ahead. The FBI issued a new statement. They released updated photos of Marlene. They offered a reward of $250,000 for information leading to her capture. Tips flooded in, sightings from across the continent. Most were useless, but a few were credible. A woman matching Marlene's description had been seen at a bus station in Montana. She had purchased a ticket to Seattle. Cash. The FBI contacted Seattle police. They reviewed security footage from the bus terminal. They found her. Marlene had arrived 3 days ago. She had gotten off the bus. She had walked out of the terminal, and she had disappeared into the city. The FBI sent a team. They canvassed the area. They checked hotels, shelters, rental properties. They found nothing. But they found something else. A storage locker. Rented 2 weeks ago. Paid for 6 months in advance. Cash. The name on the rental agreement was Margaret Hollis. The same alias Marlene had used before. The FBI opened the locker. Inside were supplies, non-perishable food, water, medical kits, camping gear, and a map. The map was marked with locations, red circles, numbers next to each circle. The FBI compared the locations to known properties. None matched. These were new. Potential sites. Future operations. Marlene was not running. She was relocating. She was setting up again. The FBI dispatched teams to each location on the map. They checked them simultaneously. 5 sites in total, all remote, all isolated. 4 of the sites were empty, undeveloped land, no structures, no evidence of activity. But the 5th site was different. It was a small farmhouse, abandoned, no utilities, no recent sales, but someone had been there. The FBI found fresh tire tracks, footprints, a recent campfire, food wrappers. Inside the house, they found a room, newly constructed, drywall, a door with a lock, a cot, a bucket, and on the wall, written in marker, a message. You are getting closer, but not close enough. Marlene had been there. She had built the room. She had left the message. And then she had vanished again. Agent Tran stood in the center of the room. She looked at the message. She did not say anything for a long time. Then she turned to me. She said, "She wants us to chase her." I said, "I know." Agent Tran said, "Why?" I said, "Because she is still testing. She wants to see if we can catch her. And if we can't, she will keep going." Agent Tran said, "And if we do catch her?" I said, "I don't know. Maybe she stops. Maybe she doesn't. But we have to try." The FBI continued the hunt. They tracked financial transactions. They monitored border crossings. They coordinated with international agencies. But Marlene stayed invisible. Weeks passed, then months. The case remained open. The task force stayed active, but the leads dried up. Jessica Lane began the long process of recovery. She was placed in protective custody. She started therapy. She reconnected with her family. She would never be the same. But she was alive. The families of the other victims received closure. Some had bodies to bury. Some did not. But they knew what had happened. They knew who was responsible. And they knew one of the people responsible was still out there. I continued working the case. I could not let it go. I kept searching for patterns, connections, anything that would lead to Marlene. And then, 6 months after Jessica was found, I received a package. It was delivered to my apartment. No return address. Postmarked from a city I had never been to. Inside was a notebook. Black, spiral bound. I opened it. The first page had a message. Handwritten, Marlene's handwriting. It read, his file for Spucker movement and all along the hearth. He lay prey to grey the press. Before was just someone so corner, and he pressed, and is costly. The filing loose of the hinds to battley, each braid. Killiston. He seems souls a found fights to antis Tyson, and he strained chine. You did well. You found Jessica. You stopped Gerald. You forced me to adapt. But you did not stop me. I am still here, still watching, still working. The experiment continues. The data collection continues. The refinement continues. You think this is about cruelty. It is not. It is about understanding, control, the limits of human resilience. Some people break. Some people adapt. And some people refuse to do either. Those are the ones I am interested in now. You are one of them. You could have stopped. You could have moved on. But you did not. You kept searching. You kept pushing. You refused to let go. You refuse to let go. That makes you valuable. That makes you interesting. So I will give you one more chance. There is one more. One more woman. Still alive. Still waiting. Her name is in the files you have not read yet. Her location is in the data you have not analyzed. Find her. Prove you are good enough. Or don't. And she dies. The choice is yours. M. The notebook was empty after that. Just blank pages. I called Agent Tran. I told her about the package. She said the FBI would analyze it. Fingerprints, DNA, postmark tracking, everything. But I already knew they would find nothing. Marlene was too careful. The message was clear. This was not over. It would never be over. Not until Marlene was caught. Or until she decided to stop. And I did not think she would ever decide to stop. Because for Marlene, this was not a crime. It was a calling, a purpose, a lifelong study. And as long as there were people to study, she would continue. The FBI reopened the files. They searched for names they had missed, women who had been mentioned but not confirmed, entries that had been overlooked. They found a name, buried in a spreadsheet, a notation next to a property that had already been cleared. Brianna Cole. The property was researched. This time, they went deeper. They used advanced imaging. They checked for underground structures, hidden rooms, anything that might have been missed. And they found something. A septic tank, old, unused, but recently accessed. The cover had been moved. The bolts had fresh scratches. They opened it. Inside, 20 feet down, was a chamber, concrete, sealed, a ladder built into the wall. At the bottom, they found Brianna Cole. She was alive. Barely, but alive. She had been there for 3 years. Brianna was brought up. She was rushed to a hospital. She would survive. Like Jessica, she would need years of recovery. But she was alive. The FBI had found her. Because of Marlene's message. Because of the clue. But the question remained. Why had Marlene told us? Was it a game? A test? A way to prove her control? Or was it something else? I do not know. And I do not think I ever will. Because Marlene Finch is still out there. Still free. Still watching. And somewhere, she is already planning the next experiment. The case is not closed. It never will be. Not until she is caught. And every day that passes is another day she is refining her methods. Adapting. Learning. The FBI is still hunting. Still searching. Still hoping for the break that will bring her in. But Marlene has been doing this for over 15 years. And she has never made a mistake. Until now. Because she reached out. She engaged. She gave us clues. And that means she wants something. Maybe attention. Maybe validation. Maybe just the thrill of the chase. But whatever it is a weakness. And weaknesses can be exploited. So the hunt continues. And I am still part of it. Because I cannot stop. I cannot let go. Because somewhere out there, there might be another woman, another room, another notebook. And if I stop looking, she dies alone, in the dark, forgotten. I will not let that happen. This is the case that never ends. The predator who will not stop. The shadow that refuses to step into the light. But shadows can be tracked. Patterns can be found. And no one stays invisible forever. Marlene Finch made one mistake. She let us see her work. She let us into her mind. And now we know how she thinks, how she operates, how she selects, how she controls. And that knowledge will be her undoing. It might take months. It might take years. But eventually, she will slip. She will make the error she has avoided for so long. And when she does, we will be there. This case started with a quiet house on Mapleton Drive. A mailbox full of letters. A door no one knocked on. It ends when Marlene Finch is finally brought to justice, when the last victim is found, when the last notebook is closed. Until then, the work continues. The search continues. And the fear remains. Because out there, in the quiet neighborhoods and the isolated roads and the places no one looks, there are still secrets waiting to be uncovered. And some of those secrets are still breathing.